You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, COP26 President Alok Sharma tells Sky News that North Sea gas extraction is not a solution to the energy crisis. Hundreds of people told to evacuate in California after a winter wildfire burns through the Big Sur. And protesters against HS2 take to the streets as the Transport Secretary announces the third phase of the project linking London to Manchester. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. It's precisely 12 weeks since world leaders held their summit in Glasgow, and today the COP26 President Alok Sharma has urged the world to honour the Glasgow Climate Pact. But with a cost of living crisis in the UK and soaring global energy prices, there is a concern that some of the climate pledges made by world leaders will be undermined. In an interview with Sky News' climate correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter, Alok Sharma said that extracting more gas from the North Sea is not the answer to bringing down energy prices for UK consumers, despite a group of MPs calling for more drilling to go ahead.
Mr Sharma, thank you very much for speaking to Sky News. What is the government's position on more extraction of gas from the North Sea? Because there are those who are now making the argument that it is part of the answer in terms of easing energy prices, gas prices. What is it that the government believes about whether that is an answer?
We face an international wholesale gas price. Even if you were extracting more right now from the North Sea basin, ultimately the price that's going to be generated is going to be on the international wholesale gas price.
So it's not the answer?
Well, if I may. So what I'm saying to you is that the idea that you will suddenly change things and that will impact the price of wholesale gas internationally, I don't think that is realistic.
There are a growing group of MPs who are starting to talk about the cost of living crisis and the energy crisis and suggesting that the squeeze on the pockets of ordinary British people will mean that the costs of net zero will be intolerable for them in the short term. What is your assessment of that argument?
I think that is a sort of separate issue from net zero. And I would contend that the way that you ensure that you keep energy prices low, the way that you ensure that you have domestic security of supply, and the way you ensure that you are indeed cutting emissions is to continue to do what we've been doing, increasing our renewables work. And of course, in terms of baseload, we want to ensure that we are seeing more investment in nuclear and hydrogen and other technologies, and that is happening.
America is struggling to get climate change legislation passed. Joe Biden said that it was central to his climate change strategy. He can't do it. How much does that worry you?
Clearly, it is up to every country to ensure that they deliver the commitments that they've made in Glasgow, and that means delivering domestically. And I very much hope that the US will get its legislation through.
One of the key planks of the Glasgow Climate Pact was every country agreeing to come back by the end of 22. With enhanced nationally determined contributions to up their ambition. Can we have it on record that the UK is going to do that?
What we've heard from the Independent Committee on Climate Change is that the UK's NDC is aligned to the Paris temperature goal. Of course, we will look at the science and see how that develops. But the key issue, as the CCC has said, is about delivery, and that's what we're going to be focusing on in the UK.
That sounds like you're trying to not commit that you'll come back by the end of 2022 with something new.
Hannah, I'm telling you precisely what it says in the Glasgow Climate Pact, and I've said to you that from a UK perspective, as the CCC has said, is that we are aligned with the Paris temperature goals.
And Hannah is here with me now. So Hannah, Alok Sharma there insisting that more drilling in the North Sea is not the answer to the energy crisis. So how much tension is there over this issue?
I think we are seeing the government having to navigate in increasingly tricky territory. You've got this small group of very well-organised Conservative MPs and one peer, who are now, they're calling themselves Net Zero Scrutiny Group. They are putting pressure on the government to extract more gas. They say it will make gas supplies cheaper and more secure. And we've heard this very firm position now from the government that that is not the answer. It's an international market. However, there is real concern within the greener wing of the Conservative Party that the argument about extracting more gas is going to gain traction, particularly as people are more squeezed when the price cap is raised. And that is going to make it difficult in turn, or more difficult at least, to invest in renewables. Then you've got this broader area for argument around the cost of living crisis and about whether ordinary people will be able to find the cash to invest in boilers and better insulation and electric cars if they are struggling to feed themselves or pay their heating bills. Now, there is real worry about that becoming a problem for the government because the Treasury has not ruled out tax increases to help us go green, hasn't ruled out reduced public spending, and it simply cannot cover all of the out-of-pocket costs for everybody in this country as we make this huge transition. And I think what we're seeing here is that after the big bang of COP26, everybody had to go home to their own nations and start to make it work. America's struggling with climate change legislation. The UK has its own challenges. And Alok Sharma said to me today, I never promised that this was going to be easy.
Hannah, thanks very much indeed. Hundreds of people in the north of California have been told to evacuate because of a wildfire in the Big Sur area. The fire, which started on Friday, swept through the mountains, burning over 1,500 acres of brush and redwood trees. Officials say more than 250 firefighters are currently battling the wildfire, which is being fuelled by winds of up to 50 miles an hour. NBC correspondent Steve Patterson has the latest from California.
Yeah, that wildfire sweeping over an iconic part of California late in the season, the so-called Colorado fire, because it's named after California's Palo Colorado Canyon, grew to more than 700 acres, according to CAL FIRE's Sunday night. Intense, gusty winds, we're talking up to 50 miles an hour, blew the flames erratically across the area's steep canyons and famous landmarks like the picturesque Bixby Bridge there on Highway 1. More than 200 structures still in the threat zone, even as the winds have now started to ease and die down. And you can add this to a list of fires burning outside of the peak season in an area with little to no fire history. So you can imagine how ripe the vegetation is there. As year after year, this footprint gets bigger here in California, the fires starting to get even worse. This fire now 35% contained.
Now some of today's other climate news, and Cape Town has recorded its hottest temperature ever, beating the previous record by almost 3 degrees. The Table Bay area reached 45.2 degrees, according to some experts. The previous all-time record was 42.4 degrees. If confirmed by the authorities, it would mean that Cape Town was the hottest location in all of Africa on Saturday. Chinese authorities have warned that heavy air pollution is likely during the Winter Olympics, but said emergency plans were in place to ensure the Games were not disrupted by smog. According to the country's Environment Ministry data, concentrations of hazardous airborne particles, known as PM2.5, stood at 205 micrograms per cubic metre in Beijing on Monday morning. An alliance of airlines and airports, including Lufthansa, Air France and Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, have called for the European Union to change its planned climate change legislation, saying it'll make them less competitive with their non-European rivals. Last year, the EU presented plans to enforce stricter rules on CO2 emissions and the use of synthetic fuel blends, as well as the implementation of a kerosene tax. Environmental activists have been protesting against Phase 2B of HS2, which has been presented to Parliament today. It's the final phase of a 3-part plan for the new high-speed railway network to link London to other parts of the UK. So let's take a look in more detail at those plans. Construction of Phase 1, connecting London to the West Midlands, began in September 2020. Now, this phase alone will involve building more than 300 bridges and 70 viaducts. The second stage, Phase 2A, connects Birmingham and Crewe. Now, this has already been approved by Parliament and construction work is due to begin in spring 2024. Now, in November 2021, the eastern leg of the high-speed line to Leeds was scrapped. And today marked the first Parliament reading of the bill for Phase 2B, which connects Crewe to Manchester. Now, this phase would cut the journey time from London to Manchester by 55 minutes to 1 hour and 11 minutes. Sky's Becky Cottrell reports from Manchester.
When the government talks HS2, levelling up leads the conversation. In Manchester, the mayor is behind high-speed rail but isn't happy with current plans for the city. He wants an underground station to be built for HS2 passengers.
If we try and do everything on the surface because it's cheaper, it would also require something of a concrete jungle spreading out to the east, where communities, I think, would be completely severed by some of the infrastructure that would have to be built. So for a whole host of reasons, it's the wrong solution.
Then there are those who oppose the network entirely. This protest in the city centre may not have attracted huge numbers, but they made their point clear with this visual metaphor, a white elephant.
It's an incredible waste of money. The destruction of the environment is absolutely iniquitous.
HS2 will say that they're going to mitigate the damage that they do environmentally, but by definition you can't mitigate for irreplaceable landscapes. So we're talking about ancient woodlands, we're talking about destroying landscapes that have evolved over centuries.
Karen Wilding worries the cost of a ticket will mean only wealthy people can afford to travel on the high-speed network.
I can't afford the trains, even as it is at the moment. I have to go by coach. OK, so basically our transport system is the problem. And HS2 is not solving our transport system. It is not going to give us the choice to get out of our cars.
The government insists their plan will get people off the motorways and onto the railway.
I think residents are behind it because they understand that it's going to mean not just quicker journeys to places like Manchester, Birmingham and London, but it will just mean more capacity on local routes. So actually those quicker local journeys are more frequent.
Many in the north disagree. The government recently scrapped a new high-speed rail link across the Pennines in favour of upgrading existing lines. Levelling up, once again boiling down to how much those in power are willing to spend. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Manchester.
Do stay tuned. Coming up here on the Daily Climate Show, I'll be joined by Deputy Director at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, Seppi Golzari-Munro, and journalist and author David Wallace-Wells. And we'll be discussing the solutions to the energy crisis and the latest emergency measures introduced by China to curb air pollution before the Winter Olympics. Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. And we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with Deputy Director at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, Seppi Golzari-Munro, and journalist and author David Wallace-Wells. So good evening to both of you. Nice to see you both. So, the solution to the energy crisis in the UK is not to drill for more oil and gas. That's what COP President Alok Sharma told us today, following repeated calls from some Conservative MPs to do just that. Well, international gas prices are sky high today, in part at least due to Putin's Russia restricting the flow. So what's the solution? Should every country be energy independent if possible, be that with oil, gas or renewables? Seppi, what do you think? There are some voices in the Conservative Party who say get rid of green levies. People can't afford those at the moment because of the squeeze on their incomes. They also say that we should increase the amount of gas that's being drilled for in the North Sea to try to get over the energy crisis. Alok Sharma says that's not the way to go. How much tension and split is there over this issue, not just in government, but more broadly, do you think?
Honestly, Anna, I think it's a bit of a red herring. As Hannah said, it's a very small minority of Conservative MPs. Most Conservative MPs, indeed most of the British public really support climate action. It's the topmost concern for the British public in the issues of climate and environment. So it really is a red herring. And I think the reality that most serious politicians who are looking at this issue understand is that it's our continued reliance on polluting fossil fuels that are dependent on the kind of work of, let's put it mildly, unfriendly regimes. So, it's coming up for a year now since Putin's Russia began its latest round of geopolitical game playing, restricting gas supplies into Europe and contributing to the gas price spike. So actually the best way to reduce our energy bills is to reduce our reliance on gas by insulating our homes, improving our housing stock, and continuing to move towards the homegrown and clean and cheap new renewables in the electricity system.
Okay. And David, you're in New York at the moment. So what about the US point of view? How much consensus is there about managing transition but keeping prices down for consumers? What's the picture there?
Well, as I think is almost always the case on climate, we're a little less progressive in our collective outlook than you see in the UK or across Europe. But I think most energy experts would agree that the price crisis that we're seeing now, not just in the UK, but really all across the world, is not the result of climate policies. Drilling for more oil would not meaningfully address, or producing more gas would not meaningfully address the short-term problem. And if we're thinking about trying to build a smoother transition to a more stable energy future a decade from now, it seems pretty clear, I think, from all expert perspectives, that the best path to that is to radically expand our renewable build out so that over the next 5 or 7 or 10 years, we're not as dependent on petrostates like Russia or Saudi Arabia for our energy needs. That's not to say that every country can or should go entirely energy independent, but it does happen to be the case that the international alliances that renewable energy pulls you into tend to be alliances with socially and politically more friendly regimes who are less prone to this kind of gamesmanship. And I think as a result, a more renewable energy, say 2 or 5 year plan is going to get us to a much better, cheaper place when it comes to energy.
So, Seppi, you'll both agree that renewables in future will make bills cheaper. Well, what about in the short term? What about now? Just insulating your loft isn't going to keep people's energy prices, energy bills much lower, is it?
Well, actually, we've had the ECI, you've got a report out today that shows that if the UK government had continued with its plans to insulate homes, they were modest plans, but nonetheless had continued with those plans, 9 million UK households would be paying £170 less on their energy bills this year. So actually the cost of not acting, of not insulating our homes, has added an eye-watering amount to people's bills, and that's not insignificant, and that's a modest proposal that was back in 2013. Actually, if you ramped up the insulation program, you could reach many more households and significantly reduce their bills. So I think there are schemes that are very popular with the public that could be started and ramped up, very, very soon, because we know that actually, experts say that the gas prices are going to remain high for at least 18 months to 2 years. So we can make significant inroads if we actually just get the policies in place.
OK, let's move on to our next issue now, because Chinese authorities are to impose dramatic emergency restrictions on polluting businesses and vehicles ahead of the Winter Olympics in order to avoid high levels of air pollution. The winter weather conditions are very unfavourable, according to Chinese authorities. So what does it tell us about their long-term commitment to tackling air pollution? And David, first of all, tell us why air pollution in China is so bad. It was home to 42 of the world's 100 most polluted cities last year, and that didn't even include Beijing, which is having such problems with smog now.
Yeah, India is the country in the world with the worst air pollution problems, but China is not doing very well either. Largely, it's because of industrial production and coal burning, but it also has to do with weather patterns and the urban density around old coal plants. So they've actually tried to do some long-term planning. They've moved a lot of that coal production away from cities, which is one reason why many fewer people are dying from air pollution now in Beijing than were in 2013, 2014. But as these measures show, it's obviously not sufficient to make even a couple of weeks comfortably, reliably clear of not just unsightly, but lethal, potentially lethal pollution.
Well, yes, and Seppi, what do you make of their step to get polluting companies to stop their business short term in order to get some results? What does it say about the effect of an international event like this? Is it a force for good, or is this just a short-term fix and China will go back to its same habits as soon as it's over?
I mean, it is an interesting point, isn't it? The fact that China clearly cares so much about international opinion that it's going to go to these great lengths to clean up its act, albeit for a short time, before it finds itself hosting athletes and media outlets. I mean, that's informative in and of itself. And I think we saw in the international climate process that China does care about global opinion and how it's perceived. So that could lead to a bit more of a virtuous cycle of peer pressure. Obviously, this is a short-term measure, but these things can lead to some more embedded action in the future.
Do you think that's right? Are you encouraged by it at all, David? I mean, or is it sort of greenwashing on an international stage? Because China's in a strange position, isn't it? It's the most polluting country in the world, and yet it's also investing a huge amount in renewables.
I think the medium-term view is that China's been tackling air pollution relatively aggressively by global standards. They're still far from the air that we would be happy to be breathing in the UK or the US, but they've made huge gains over the last decade, and everything suggests that they're going to continue doing that. It's not sufficient. It leaves many people behind, but I don't think this is just a short-term greenwashing episode. They're trying to make themselves look best for a brief period, but the longer-term trajectory is encouraging. I would just point to the bigger picture. You just flashed a little graphic on the screen showing that the particulate matter in Beijing regularly exceeds WHO guidelines. 95% of the world has air where the particulate matter exceeds the WHO guidelines. So while China is in a worse place than almost everywhere else, aside from India, this is not just a problem confined to China. It's a problem that we're seeing in London, in New York, all across the West, all across the developing world. And it's one we really need to be dealing with alongside the challenge of climate change.
Well, yes, and Seppi, very briefly, we've been discussing just that, with clean air zones being discussed, expansion of them in London and Manchester as well in England. I mean, do you think that Beijing's issues will highlight the problems of pollution, one that some people say isn't talked enough about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a factor that impacts so many people across the world, and you have seen movements in the UK, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, really trying to raise awareness about it. But you're right, it's not up there as high as perhaps it should be on the agenda, given its severe negative impacts on health. And so possibly this could actually, with the world's media and the world's eyes on Beijing, could help really raise the issue.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Seppi Golzari-Monroe, David Wallace-Wells, always good to talk to you both. Thanks very much indeed for your time. And tomorrow I'll be joined by Director of Research at Chatham House, Bernice Lee, and scientist and author Michael Mann. But that's it for me. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.